Mic's on, green light, mic on. Good evening. This public forum on redistricting for single member District 1 is now called to order at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, March 28th for the purposes stated in the notice for tonight's meeting. Board members present in this meeting room are Trustee Mike Stoma, District 1, and myself, Mike Sullivan, District 8. I don't see any trustees online via virtual participation. So we'll move on. I wish to extend a warm welcome to everyone. I'd like to thank Dr. Gerald Napolis from the Cypher campus, interim president, for being here and making the facility available and being such a good host. Thank you. OTS, as always, for having everything set up for us so seamlessly. There's no need for certification for the meeting. Presentation by Thompson Horton and demographic team. Our first order of business is a presentation by our legal and demographic team concerning what redistricting is, the role census data plays in redistricting, the system's census data for 2010 and 2020, and initial proposed maps. And I need to recognize that Dr. Steve Head is online, online for this meeting as well. Ms. McBride and Mr. Gardner, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Trustee Sullivan, and it's great to be here this afternoon. I'm here with my co-counsel, Paige Martin, who will also be presenting tonight, and one member of our demographic team, Matthew Cluck, who will be participating and presenting tonight virtually. And as Trustee Sullivan indicated, we're here to present not only a little bit about the legal background, but also census data as well as proposed maps. And to tell you more specifically about tonight's objective, we're going to start with a legal overview that provides the proper framing for the works that we're doing together called redistricting. And what redistricting is just rebalancing population between single member districts, which are elective units of the Lone Star College system. And so we rebalance in response to population changes that we're made aware of every 10 years. So we'll talk about those population changes as the next segment of our presentation tonight after we give a brief legal overview. And then with any time we are rebalancing population, there's more than one way that we can do it. And so how do we evaluate whether one map is better than the other? Well, we have certain constraints on our rebalancing ability that come from our consent decree, as well as from the redistricting criteria or map drawing principles adopted by the board. So we'll go over those before we talk about the proposed maps, because those will be our marching orders by which we will judge each of the proposed maps. And then our final order of business will be to talk about the redistricting timeline, where we are on that timeline, and the immediate next steps. You'll go to the next slide and the slide after that. I'm going to turn it over now for part of our legal overview to my co-counsel, Paige Martin, who will provide that legal overview. Thank you so much, Paige.
Thank you, Lisa. So as we start the legal overview, we want to make sure that we're all on the same page when thinking about this redistricting process. So we're going to answer 4 simple questions: what, why, when, and how, when we think about the redistricting process. And the first question is, what is redistricting exactly? Well, the technical definition is it's the process by which the boundaries of elective districts or single member districts are periodically redrawn in response to changes in population. Well, how do we know that there's changes in the population? Well, we get that information from the census data that is released. So the federal government does a census every 10 years, 2010, 2020, there'll be another one in 2030, and on even numbered years. And then the following odd number year, they release that information to states and other entities that then have to look at the population change analysis and decide, do we have to respond within our elective districts to the census data? The Lone Star College system is currently divided into 9 single member districts, and all of those are represented by one trustee, with the exception of single member district 7, which currently has a vacancy. But if you look at the map, you can see that the districts are different sizes. At the very top, number 7 is much larger than the other districts, especially like 3 and 4. But when we're talking about balancing the districts, we're not talking about physical size. we're talking about population size. And so what redistricting is when we get that census data, we have to shift and redraw the boundary lines in order to even out the population among the districts. So you'll see on the screen, there's a picture of the current trustees. And this redistricting process is very important, both to trustees and to you all as the public, because the trustees, they are charged with representing the interest of their single member district. And as a community member, you want to know which trustee is representing your interest. And so the current trustees value this process very much, and they have been very involved in creating criteria and giving feedback to us and the demographers about these proposed maps that we're going to show you in just a minute. So within and the entire board is very committed to this process, but there's a redistricting committee within the board that's made up of 3 members. The chair of the redistricting committee is Trustee Mike Sullivan, who gave us the wonderful welcome this evening. And also he's joined on the committee by Trustee Ernestine Pierce from Single Member District 2 and Trustee Art Murillo from Single Member District 4. Those 3 trustees have a laser focus in this redistricting process, and they're working very hard and meeting periodically to consider the feedback that we've received both from trustees and from the public to take back to the larger board feedback for the next iteration of the map drawing process. So why do we redistrict? Well, the trigger can be found in state law in the Texas Education Code that says if the census data indicates that the population of the most populous district exceeds the population of the least populous district by more than 10%, then we have to redistrict. We have to redraw the lines and balance out the single member districts. And so that's the trigger. And we'll telegraph it to you. We wouldn't be here tonight unless we were above that 10%. And so, but that's what triggers the redistricting process. So when do we have to redistrict? Well, the law gives us a deadline for redistricting as well. And the Lone Star College system has elections for trustees in an even number of years. So the next trustee election will be this November 2022. The law says if you're going to redistrict, you have to do it, you have to complete the process by 90 days before the first election that you can respond to the census data that was released. And so 90 days before November 8th, 2022 is August 10th. But the board, in thinking about the timeline, they wanted to push it back even further than that because of one important reason. So anybody wanting to be a trustee to put their name forth as a candidate, they can start submitting their applications in mid-July. And so the board really wanted the whole the redistricting process to be completed before that date that members of the community can start submitting their application for candidacy. And so the board has created a timeline, and we are going to complete this redistricting process by the end of June so that members of the community, if they're interested in running for the board, they'll know the new boundary lines and they'll know where they need to reside in order to represent a particular district. So how do we redistrict? And Lisa's going to talk more about the additional constraints that we have, but redistricting again is about balancing population. So we are moving populations in and out of districts in order to balance out the individual strength of an individual vote. And so we talked about the legal requirement. The first thing that we look at as we're thinking about redistricting and rebalancing the single member districts, we look at is the most populous district and the least populous district, is the difference greater than 10%? And if so, then we know we have to redistrict. But additionally, there are extra constraints that Lisa's going to talk more about when we are redrawing these boundary maps. So I mentioned the census, and you probably all remember filling out the census data not too long ago and getting reminders to do it because it's very, very important. So the federal government conducted a census in 2020. And when I mentioned earlier that information gathered in the census has been disseminated the following year. And the way that it's disseminated is we learn the population changes in small blocks known as census blocks, and that's the jurisdiction of the population living within jurisdictions. And then we build upon those blocks into bigger areas of population. But when the information is disseminated, we get total population. We also get voting age population, and we get information on the citizen voting age population. And the next slide just has a more of a definition of each of those categories. The total population is all persons residing in a jurisdiction on census day, and that means from birth to as old as it gets, the total population. And that's what we base the first criteria on, the 10% difference, and that is based on total population. We also get from the census voting age population, the number of persons in a particular jurisdiction that are 18 years of age or older. And additionally, we also get the citizen voting age population, the number of persons who are 18 years of age or older who are citizens in the jurisdiction. And that's calculated using survey data over a period of time. If you'll remember, they don't ask specifically, are you a citizen in the census data, but there's in the census form, but then there's an additional survey. And the citizen voting age population numbers are, it's a mathematical estimate of what is the estimated number of people in this area who not only are old enough to vote, but who are also citizens and who are eligible to vote. So when we look at the maps and we think about the redistricting process, the question we want to ask is, are the single member districts well balanced? And the way that we answer that question is the single member districts must be drawn with substantially equal population, not exactly equal. And like we saw with the big District 7 and the smaller District 4, there's no way that they're going to be exactly the exact number of population, but substantially equal or equivalent is important. We don't want overpopulated and underpopulated districts, because then that means that certain members in the districts have greater voting strength. So Lisa likes to use the illustration of a pie. If you'll think about a pie and you split the pie down the middle, and each side of the pie represents a single member district. And let's say on one side of the pie, you have 1,000 people who are going to vote. And the other side of the pie, there's only 100. Well, if you're a voter and you really want to elect someone, you'd rather be on the side with 100 because your voting strength is greater where there's fewer people. And so the single member districts right now in the Lone Star College system are not that disparate. There's not that great of a difference. But that's why we don't want to have overpopulated or underpopulated districts, because we want to normalize the strength of one vote among every district. And so again, the exact equality of population is not required, but we want to get it as close as we can as far as voting strength among the districts. We want to normalize the strength of one individual vote. So now what I'm going to do, we talked about the trigger is the 10% rule. And so again, like I said, we wouldn't be here tonight if we didn't need to redistrict. And so I'm going to turn it over to one of our demographers now, Matthew Cluck, to talk more about what the census numbers tell us about how are we over the 10% number or are we not. So Matthew, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Say, Paige, thank you. And Matthew, before you get started, let me jump in. I forgot to ask Trustee Stoma if he had any comments. So I'd like to give him the mic for a moment to make any introductory comments. Then also if he might have any thoughts after hearing the first part of the presentation, please.
I don't have any real comments other than I just want to compliment everyone for the hard work you're doing. And I know this is a tough job, you know, to try to do this and be fair and everybody represented. But I want to say that I'm completely behind you folks, and you know, it's just in any way, and I think you're doing a good job here. So other than that, carry on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Selma. I appreciate it. Thank you, Matthew.
All right, thank you all. So first off, we're just going to take a look at the demographic data for the 2010 boundaries. So this chart here is broken into 4 quadrants. So total population, population percentages, voting age population percentages, and citizen voting age population percentages. So each row represents a district, districts 1 through 9. And then kind of the key areas to look here. So in 2010, the differential between the most and least populous districts was that 7.3%. So that's under that 10% magic number that we're looking for. So that was purposefully done. And can we go back one more? Yeah, so a few more things on 2010. Kind of the key points, the 9 district average. So taking the average of the total population of the total area that Lone Star College covers, you'll get 198,134 persons. And then some key things that we previously mentioned. So the opportunity district. So District 4 is our opportunity district. And the key number there you'll see in the bottom right for District 4 is that above 50% for the minority group. So the Hispanic column there, you're at 51.7%. So that's a key number to look out for, is maintaining that above 50% threshold. And then also our influence districts, districts 2, 3, and 6. The influence districts by definition are a combination of minority CVAP percentages above 50%. So if you combine those African American and Hispanic columns for CVAP for those districts 2, 3, and 6, you'll get a majority above 50%. So that's also something we look at when we do our redistricting process. Next, please. So fast forward to 2020, keeping the same boundaries as they were, but just updating the actual census information that we received based on the 2020 census data. You can see there's a ton of growth in Lone Star College District. So the 9 district average jumped up to 251,434 persons. And now the most populous district, District 1, is 279,244 persons. District 4 remained the least populous district, but the important thing here to look at is the 38.2% differential, which is well above our 10% needed to satisfy the requirements of the districts. All right. So here kind of the net differences between 2010 and 2020. The key things here are District 1, which we're kind of focused on tonight, had the second highest growth in population, only second to District 8, and that's they're neck and neck at 77,000. District 1, 77,739, and then District 8, a growth of 77,806 persons. So something with District 1, we need to take population from it. So that's kind of our key goal with District 1, and then rebalancing the others as needed. Okay. So specifically District 1, it showed the second most population growth from 201,000 to 279,000 with a net addition of 77,739 persons. all population groups increased by raw numbers, but Hispanic grew by far the most, with 33,927 Hispanic persons added over that 10-year period. And since those minority groups increased, the Anglo population decreased by a share of negative 10.9%. So the Anglo population went up, but their share of the overall district, their pie, if you will, went down. So that's kind of the key parts for that. So again, overall, Lone Star College added a ton of growth, 476,000 persons over that 10-year period. And now the district is up to 2.2 million persons that it covers. And again, the differential is above that 10% threshold that we're needing to get under. And the most populous district changed from District 9 to District 1 over that 10-year period, but District 4 remained the least populous over that 10-year period. But yeah, so overall, the key point here is that we need to redraw some lines and move some population around.
Thank you, Matthew. And just to recap so that we all continue to be on the same page, so far we've talked about what redistricting is, why we redistrict, what that trigger is, being over that 10% threshold. We've talked about when, our deadline for completing this process, as well as how. And so now we want to talk about a little bit more the limitations on the how. There are more than one way to bring our entire system back into balance, back under that 10% threshold. But there are some constraints on our authority. The first constraint is a consent decree that I want to talk to you about. And the second group of constraints are the map drawing principles that the board adopted. So in 2013, the system was sued by a group of plaintiffs challenging at that time the system's at-large system for electing trustees. The system decided voluntarily to go to single member districts, and as a part of that agreement entered into a consent decree with a federal judge regarding what those single member districts would look like. And as a result of that consent decree, the judge has ordered that the system's single member districts always have to have at least one single member district that is what we call an opportunity district on the basis of Hispanic citizen voting age population. Again, on the basis of Hispanic citizen voting age population. That single member district has to be greater than 50%, a majority citizen voting age population with respect to Hispanics. And that's your single member district number 4. So when the 2013 map was drawn, it was drawn with single member district number 4 being the opportunity district, and any attempt to rebalance as a result of population changes has to maintain single member district number 4 as your opportunity district. The consent decree also had one other requirement, which was there need to be 2 additional single member districts that constitute what we call influence districts. And how the court defined an influence district was on the basis of African American and Hispanic citizen voting age population combined. So those 2 minority groups combined would be greater than the majority of the citizen voting age in a single member district. In this case, you had to have 2. In fact, you have 3 single member districts number 2, 3, and 6. When you combine the citizen voting age population of Hispanics and African Americans in those districts, they're greater than 50%, or they're the largest single minority group with respect to those 2 demographic groups. And so we are constrained in rebalancing our system in that we have to maintain 1 opportunity district, single member district 4, and we've got to maintain, in our case, because we can do 3, not just 2, we've got to maintain 3 influence districts, single member districts 2, 3, and 6. And so that is one set of constraints. Another set of constraints that we have are the map drawing principles that were adopted by the board at the same time the board adopted their timeline for completing this redistricting work. These map drawing principles are based on state and federal law. So some things are statutorily required, as well as pragmatic things about what should be our guiding principle in deciding how we should divide population, what should be the borders between single member districts. And so there are 9 map drawing principles. Some of them are going to be familiar to you from the law we've been talking about all evening. They're just a codification of that law. And others, again, are just very pragmatic things like using a highway, a stream, a bayou, some kind of natural landmark to be the dividing line between a single member district. So let's go over these 9 criteria. The first one being, and speaking of using natural boundaries, use identifiable geographic and political boundaries when possible. So that means using, for example, an election precinct, not splitting them across a single member district, using that political boundary, a city or a county line, not splitting that across a single member district, but at the single member district boundary, and then using geographic boundaries like a lake or a stream or a highway, a major thoroughfare or something like that to be the dividing line between single member districts. The second and third one, map drawing principle should be very familiar to you, as we've been saying that redistricting, the whole focus of it specifically is to come under that 10% deviation, but more generally to rebalance so that the population of each single member district is more equal, not exactly equal, but more substantially equal. And so the next 2 map drawing principles draw upon those elements of the law. The second map drawing principle is that each single member district should be as nearly as practicable of equal population in terms of the 2020 census. Again, that's using the total population number from the census. The third map drawing principle is to keep that deviation at 10% or less. That comes straight out of state law. The fourth map drawing principle is that single member districts will be compact and composed of contiguous territory. Compactness has 2 components to it. One is physical compactness, which means the actual shape of our districts is going to be more geometric. We're going to try to avoid having single member districts that have legs and arms that expand all the way across our system, north, south, or east, west, because that suggests that we're using one focus to the exclusion of all others to draw our districts. When we're using multiple things to determine how our single member districts will look, normally those districts have a more geometric shape, not perfect rectangles or squares. It doesn't have to be perfect rectangles or squares. You rarely get that, but at least more geometric. Or there can be curvature to it, but we do want to avoid arms and legs going completely north and south of the district or east and west. So that is physical compactness, but there's also a notion of political compactness, which means that we're keeping neighborhoods and communities and things that have a political distinction to them or a political grouping to them in one single member district, as opposed to splitting them across single member districts. And contiguousness means that our single member districts are adjacent to each other. There are no gaps or holes in our system. If we were to take a pencil and to trace the exterior boundaries of all of our single member districts, we could do so without lifting our pen or pencil, because our SMDs are adjacent to one another. The fifth map drawing principle is that we shall preserve incumbent constituency relations by making sure to place our current trustees in their redrawn single member districts. That provides for continuity in incumbent constituency relationships and continuity in terms of government. If we did not do that, then we would have several vacancies on the board up for election, more than would be normal in a given election cycle. So that's why that's an important one. And so let's turn to our last 4 map drawing principles. The 6th one being, where possible, the proposed map will maintain communities of interest and neighborhoods. Communities and interests in neighborhoods have no precise definition under law or statute. That's determined by the governing body and the communities they serve. And so that's where we really need to hear from our public about whether our maps tonight, maps 1 and 2, have gotten that right, that we haven't split a community of interest or a neighborhood between 2 single member districts, but we've kept them whole and intact in 1 single member district. The 7th map drawing principle is that single member districts shall be drawn to avoid splitting county election precincts. And again, that's going to using political boundaries to be the dividing line between single member districts. That's something that we aspire to, but that's not a statutory requirement with respect to higher ed. Lower ed does have some statutory requirements depending on their average daily attendance about not splitting county election precincts. It does help us to be a better election partner on election day in situations where there are multiple entities having elections on the ballot, where our voters, our neighbors, our community members can go to 1 polling place as to multiple polling places in order to vote in all of the elections that they're entitled to on election day. But we do have other statutory requirements that we have to comply with first, as well as a federal consent decree. So with respect to that map drawing principle, it's subordinate to those requirements that are statutory or driven by federal law or our federal consent decree. Our 8th map drawing principle is a broader statement of our consent decree. The consent decree is based on the Voting Rights Act and based on the requirements of the Voting Rights Act. And so we have 2 very specific requirements that come as a result of that consent decree: 1 opportunity district and 2 influence districts. But generally speaking, where minorities or the majority in a single member district, the Voting Rights Act requires us not to draw a new map as a result of rebalancing population that dilutes their voting stream. And so we have to keep that in mind generally, in addition to the more specific requirement of our federal consent decree. And then our last map drawing principle is that we don't reinvent the wheel with redistricting. So if something is working, we try not to disturb it. Our 2013 map received approval by the Department of Justice, and it received approval by a federal court. And so to the extent that we don't have to disturb that map, we're not going to. But to the extent we need to disturb that map in order to comply with the 8 previous map drawing principles, as well as our consent decree, we will. But it's a narrow responsibility, and meaning that 2013 map starts as the base, and from that we make adjustments to it in order to satisfy our consent decree, the 10% rule, and the 8 other map drawing principles. So I know that we've gone over a lot today, but we're getting ready to turn to the 2 proposed maps that bring us into balance with respect to the 10% rule. And how you should be evaluating those 2 maps is, first, does it bring us back under 10%? If it does, get a check mark. Then, does it comply with the consent decree, maintaining an opportunity district in District 4 and maintaining influence districts in Districts 2, 3, and 6? If it does, another check mark. And then where the magic happens is, do the maps actually comply with the 9 map drawing principles that we just went over? Or if there's one that complies with those principles better, that's probably a basis for supporting that map over another map. So those 3 things keep in mind, and keep in mind in that order. Are we at 10% or less? Do we comply with the consent decree in terms of maintaining an opportunity district, and 2, actually 3, influence districts? And how well do we comply with the 9 map drawing principles? That is what needs to be in the background of your mind as you're evaluating the proposed maps. Now I'll turn it back over to Matthew Cluck to go over proposed maps 1 and 2. Thanks, Matthew.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Okay, so first plan we put together, very first one. So what you're looking at with the blue lines here are the current boundaries in place. And then when you see the colors kind of bleed over, those are the specific changes that we made, the shifts in geographies that were purposefully done to change population and demographics to comply with those map drawing principles that Lisa mentioned. So next slide, please. So the demographics for Plan 1, the key thing here that we're sitting at 9% differential with those changes we looked at on Plan 1, which we'll look at later in a little more depth. But we're at 9% below that 10% threshold, and our least populous in this plan is District 4 once again, and then our most populous is changed to District 9. Like Lisa mentioned, so we made sure to maintain our opportunity districts, of course, our District 4. So our CVAT for District 4 was 53.4% under this new plan. And then we also maintained our influence districts of 2, 3, and 6, where we combine the minority percentages, and those are a majority of the share. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. So here's the map again. We've added some circles to the specific changes that we've made. Again, all done for good reason, and for reasons that our demographic team saw opportunities to make changes for the best. So then we'll kind of get into District 1 zoomed in specifically. So next slide, please. So District 1, like I mentioned before, is one of the most populous districts. Just looking at 2020 numbers with the current boundary drawn in. So the main thing we tried to do with District 1 is, of course, we had to take population from it. It's not an opportunity district or an influence district, so it's really all about that raw total and getting it closer to the average as best we can, and as well as helping out all the other districts around it if needed. So District 3 to the east of District 1 here was one of the lower populated districts, and it needed some population added to it. So it's kind of a good match to have 1 and 3 kind of swap in that southern portion down there. So District 1 loses quite a bit of population to District 3 at 32,000 persons under that circled change. So that brought District 1 closer to the average, but to adjust a little bit more, we did take a little population to the north. At Spring Cypress Road, we took a little population from District 9 at around 9,500 persons. So kind of a net loss of persons for Plan 1 for District 1 of 22,000 persons. So that successfully brought it down closer to the average that we were looking for. Next slide, please. So zoomed in on that southern bit, the boundaries here. So to the very south, Clay Road is still the boundary for District 1. That's been the same since the 2010 drawing. But the adjustment with District 1 and District 3, it loses some geography to District 3, with North Fry Road being a western boundary going up to Keith Harrow Boulevard, and then a little further east, Greenhouse Road going north-south, and then Freeman Road is the northern boundary. So we looked at that area as a good opportunity to take a good amount of population from District 1. Next, please. To the north, so like I was saying, we kind of needed to take population from District 9 and then offset a little bit of that population loss District 1 had to District 3, because District 3 needed quite a bit added to it, but District 1 couldn't quite take that much of a loss. So we found a good spot up by Spring Cypress Road. and then kind of Grant Road, that corner there, and then down to Huffmeister Road. We kind of made a nice carved off block piece where it again added 9,457 persons. So that was a good adjustment there that we thought fit well with our guidelines. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so again, the summary, District 1 gains population in the Northeast, and then it loses in the South, but just for a net loss overall, because it was such a highly populated district with the new census information. Okay. Plan 2, same goals, just drawn differently to give options and get feedback on it and build upon it. So the same idea of following the criteria of where to draw and what we need to accomplish. There's similarities, but yeah, overall the same goal. So the demographic data, looking at Plan 2, District 4, once again, our least populated district, but in Plan 2, our most populous is District 2. And then our percent differential between those two at around the same as Plan 1, 9.2%. Just one of the districts is different there. So again, we hit all of our goals as far as the opportunity district, District 4, 52.3% Hispanic and CVAP, and then districts 2, 3, and 6 all maintain their influence district status. Okay, next slide, please. Again, the circle changes to help see where the specific updates are, where the color bleeds over, and those changes. You'll see kind of with District 1 the same idea. So we can kind of zoom in on District 1. So loses population to the south, gains it to the north. Same idea, just kind of a different geographic shape, and then population numbers are obviously different as well. So it loses more population. District 1 loses much more population to District 3 in the south at 49,000 persons compared to Plan 1, which was around 32,000 persons. So for that reason, we had to go further north and take more from District 9 essentially. Next, please. Again, zoomed in. So that North Fry Road, instead of on Plan 1, how it kind of jutted in a little bit, that North Fry Road is it's a smooth straight shot boundary rather than kind of jutting in and out. And then Freeman Road is that kind of a clean boundary to the north that it makes now with District 3. Next, please. Here we kind of zoomed in to just kind of show there was no change. This is kind of to the northeast of the district. There's no change here, but it's kind of good to see how there wasn't any effect with this Windfern Road area in 1960. Okay, next, please. So here's the change to the north. It goes up to Spring Cypress Road like Plan 1, but the geographic shape takes more of Plan 9. It kind of makes a triangular shape, and it ended up taking 13,000 people from District 9. So overall, a net loss that District 1 had, but just shifted in different locations. Okay, next slide, please. Summary, yep. So like I said, we gain to the north and then lose population in the south. It's kind of a balancing act between those two. All right, so now we're going to compare them all. So we're just looking at District 1 here. We have four columns, 2010, the 2010 numbers for District 1, 2020 numbers, and then Plans 1 and 2. So First off, the total population, 2010, the census was 201,000. And then like we showed earlier, it grew so much to 279,000 persons. So we had to cut it down in both plans. Plan 2 shrinks it down more so than Plan 1, just to kind of give that option. And then looking at our CVAP voting percentages, like I mentioned before, Anglo CVAP, the percentages for Anglo CVAP goes down from 52% in 2010 across the board in the 40s for the 2020 census, and then plans 1 and 2. We did make adjustments, not purposefully, but the Anglo CVAP increased in plans 1 and 2 compared to its 2020 boundaries. And then Hispanic CVAP increased from 2010 to 2020, and then kind of remained around the same between both plans. And then African-American CVAP percentages also the same for across our plans. All right, thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you, Matthew. Trustee Stone, any questions?
Not at this time, no, thank
Okay.
you.
You comfortable with the changes that have been proposed tonight? You need
Well,
to
that's
digest them.
a wild card question. I have some things I'll discuss, I think more privately,
Okay,
but nothing major, no. I think they've done probably the best they can do here.
good. Thank you. Good job, Matthew. Thank you. We'll now go to question and answers. We'll now open the floor for questions and or comments from the public. If you're physically present, please come to the microphone to speak. If you're online, please use the action icons in Zoom to virtually raise your hand or post your question in the chat to be read aloud. Whether in person or by Zoom, please state your name and the single member district in which you live before stating your question or comment. We'll alternate between calling on those in the audience and those participating remotely. I see nothing in the chat. And no one's in the room present to speak. So we will now go to the next section, which is section 5, discussion timeline and next steps. Ms. McBride, will you present the timeline and next steps, please?
I'd be happy to, Trustee Sullivan. If we can go to the next slide. So in December of 2021, the board adopted a timeline that would govern this process, keeping in mind that we have a statutory deadline to complete this process by August of 2022, but the board wanting to complete this by the end of June because that's well in advance of the first day for a candidate to file for a place on the ballot, which is in July of 2022. And any candidate that wants to file for a place on the ballot has to know the boundaries they need to live within in order to be eligible to run for a place on the ballot. So this timeline has us completing this process by the end of June of 2022. Looking at this timeline, if you look at March 24th, which was last Thursday, we just held a redistricting committee meeting at which we considered all trustee feedback and community feedback that we had received to date in order to come up with yet another iteration of maps. So what I want the public to know is that we're continually evaluating feedback that we're getting at these community meetings, feedback we're getting from our trustees, feedback that has been provided to us on the redistricting website for the Lone Star College system, and that really affects the next map that is generated. So we're already working on a next set of maps that will be presented to the board on April 13th. And in that set of maps, we're actually looking at single member District 1 and that proposed exchange of population in the South between single member District 3 and single member District 1, making sure that it does not affect any centers that are currently in single member District 1, that those would stay in single member District 1. So looking at that exchange of population, knowing that single member District 3 does have to gain population and single member District 1 does have to lose, but seeing if we can do that in a different way to make sure that physical centers that were in single member District 1 remain in single member District 1. So after our board meeting on the 13th of April will be another redistricting meeting on April 21st to further refine any maps as a result of public and trustee comment. And then on May 11th, if we haven't already done so, this process is going, I have to tell you, much faster. This is a very hardworking board, hardworking committee, and very attentive community that we are really congelling and getting information that's helping us narrow down the maps much faster than we anticipated. If we're not down to 1 or 2 maps by May 11th will be the special board meeting date where we'll get down to 1 or 2 maps. And then on June 8th, we'll hold an official public hearing centrally at the board's normal place for holding its board meetings. And then the redistricting committee will meet once again on June 16th to consider the results of that official public hearing. And then on June 29th, all of that information, as well as the redistricting committee's recommendation, will be presented to the full board so the board can take action on a final map. And that puts us right on our timeline and our schedule of completing this process before the first data file for a place on the ballot, which is mid-July of 2022. So it's been a lot of work, but I think it's been rewarding work, and we are getting to a process that's going to carry us through the next decade pragmatically and in compliance with both federal and state law. You'll go to the next slide. This is just another way of graphically depicting our timeline that Trustee Stoma so graciously assisted us with to make sure that everyone could understand graphically what the timeline entails. And if you look at the bottom, Trustee Stoma was so gracious in including the community input periods that actually break off from the timeline and that are separate opportunities for the community in forums like this one to provide input throughout the college system. If you'll go to the next slide. So the immediate next steps is a continuing updating of our website and to finish our community meetings. And then the next slide. So we still have some round 1 community forum dates. And so this week we are meeting today, March 28th, District 1. But then we also meet on March 30th for District 6. And then next week we meet on April 4th and April 6th. April 4th will be District 5 and April 6th will be District 8. And that will round out our round 1 of community forum dates. And then our next slide are round 2 of community forum dates. And we'll determine if those dates are in fact necessary depending on the next iteration that the board approves of maps. It could be 1 map that the board narrows it down to, or several maps. If it's several maps, more than likely we'll be going out for another iteration of community forum. If it's just 1 map, because we're close to consensus and we're able to get all of our community requests and trustee requests into 1 map, we might be looking at some adjustments to our round 2 of community meetings, but that's something that is still up for discussion. And it's just an example of how well this process is working in terms of trustee input, the hard work that the administrative team, both the IT team and all the other administrative team has put into, including the general counsel's office, to this process and the community feedback that we are receiving, that we're able to progress through these milestones so quickly. And if you'll go to the next slide, just want to reiterate that there is a website that is constantly updated with the presentations that we provide to the board and the redistricting committee and the maps that are being presented and discussed. And that website is www.lonestar.edu/redistricting. And something very, very important on that website, if you can't make it to a redistricting committee meeting or a special board meeting on redistricting, or physically to one of the community meetings, or by Zoom to one of the community meetings, and you have input that you would like to provide, you can do so in writing on this website, and we encourage you to do that. Although we welcome seeing you in person at our redistricting committee meetings or at a special board meeting or at our community meetings, we understand the challenges with respect to time and being pulled in multiple directions with respect to time. And so you can always submit your written comments on the website. We monitor that and take that into account and present it to the board so that they can factor that into account when they're making suggestions for changes to the map. And Trustee Sullivan, that concludes our presentation for tonight.
Good. Thank you very much. Lisa, and thank you, Paige. Trustee Stoma, last call for any questions. Sorry to keep coming back at you.
No, not for this meeting here. So,
Okay,
thank you.
good. Thank you for hosting us tonight. Appreciate it. Before I make closing comments, I don't see anything else in the room. So do want to thank Dr. Napolis, Dr. Head, Lone Star Police Department, who is also here, OTS, who continues to provide services for us, Paige, Lisa, and the team at Gartner as well, and Trustee Stoma. So with no further business to discuss, this public education forum is now adjourned at 6:55 p.m. on March 28th. The next special board meeting on redistricting is on April 13th, 2022. The redistricting committee will hold a meeting on April 21st, 2022. Thank you.